Hello and welcome back to Games Played Technically. My name is Adrian and I am your host. You know the type of game that you complain about but play a lot? Whether because it's perpetually in early access or because it's a Bethesda special. It's the sort of game that's got serious jank and weird design decisions, the kind that you spent too much time and energy being frustrated with or straight up mad at, and yet you might have hundreds if not thousands of hours played. Anyway, today we're going to get an idea of what's going on with 7 Days to Die. Quick disclaimer, firstly, I wrote a lot of this before the Fun Pimp's first ever town hall. Because I'm slow, I didn't get a video out before then, but I'm going to keep it mostly the same and explain myself in the context of the town hall at the end of the video. Also, this is maybe going to be a little different than what's been going around recently from other content creators. I'm still relatively new to 7 Days to Die, and I imagine that both 1.0 and 2.0 have led to an influx of other new people who've gotten hooked on the game, but maybe don't know much about its long development history. Let's start from the top. In mid-2013, the Fun Pimps, a fledgling studio helmed by Richard and Joel Hunick, launched a Kickstarter campaign for a game that promised to be a unique mashup of first-person shooter, survival horror, tower defense, and role-playing game. Almost 14,000 backers said, "Hell yeah, brother," and the campaign raked in a little over $500,000, 254% of their initial goal. Backers called it one of the Kickstarter campaigns in human history. Civilizations of the Galaxy call it. Initially, the Fun Pimps planned to expand their team from just 2 full-time members, but the overwhelming success of the Kickstarter campaign led to an escalation of the project's scope. The initial promised features were already significant technical challenges: a voxel world with real-time structural physics, a stealth system, extensive crafting, skill trees representing player growth. But having met all of their stretch goals, the Fun Pimps list grew to include drivable vehicles, professional character models and customization, weather survival mechanics, and NPC survivors and bandits. A hefty task to be sure, but certainly within the reach of a team of game and software developers with an average of over 14 years in the industry. Okay, I'm poking fun, but game development is hard. Like Herculean effort tough. Herculean effort tough. And anything open world with voxels and a comprehensive destructibility model is going to be not only technically daunting, but also difficult to balance. This resulted in a few revamps and overhauls over its development history. For example, Alpha 13 was the initial overhaul of the skill and perk system. It was founded on the concept of leveling by doing. Although intuitive, mining makes you a better miner, knifing makes you a better knifer, it wasn't perfect. For example, if you wanted to get better at crafting guns, you had to either repair a gun, craft ammunition, or craft guns. Sounds fine, but this could turn into a grind and encourage crafting items you don't intend to use, which also messes with the in-game economy, which results in more balance problems. Regardless, people seem to like this system at the time. At least it seems so given how much people still talk about it this many years later. Undeterred by their moderate success, TFP decided to make big sweeping changes to skills and crafting. In Alpha 17, they tied skills to the attributes we know and love: perception, strength, fortitude, agility, and intellect. Now, if you wanted better mining tools, you had to invest in Miner 69er. This made the act of learning a craft more abstract. Putting a point into something is less direct than doing something and improving at it. It also created a severe imbalance, as strength and intellect both became must-have attributes due to the specific crafting skills and perks that they governed. The Fun Pimps made attempts to balance this out, which ultimately culminated with the controversial Alpha 21 update, in which crafting skills were separated entirely from attributes, perks, and leveling, and became their own system. How do you craft better guns now? By reading gun crafting magazines. How do you get gun crafting magazines? Mostly random chance. This, along with changes to make POIs more like small dungeons, were seen as efforts to take the sandbox out of sandbox survival RPG. It didn't help that Alpha 21 released in December of 2021, a little over 8 years after the initial Kickstarter. Still, and to answer the initial question, Joel and Richard Hunick came up with the idea. So it's their game, right? Development might be running long, but they're still working toward delivering what they initially promised, and as far as I can tell, they've never made any claims about how close the game would hew towards realism. Yet it seems like that's what people want from it. Regardless, it's a survival sandbox RPG, which as a genre, or as a mix of genre, covers a whole spectrum of games. You've got Valheim and Shrouded and the venerable OG Minecraft, but even games like Breath of the Wild fall into the category to some extent. It's up to the Fun Pimps how they fit into that mold or don't. They might, for example, remove glass jars from the game so that securing a clean water supply is much harder. Or they might decide to tune their AI to make base designs they don't agree with unviable. How the game shakes out is entirely the Fun Pimps' prerogative, right? Auteur theory emerged from the fervent intellectual climate of 1950s France, specifically as a response to workmanlike attitudes from directors toward filmmaking. Don't leave, you're still watching a video about 7 Days to Die, just bear with me. The point of auteur theory was that a director shouldn't make a film in the way a cobbler makes shoes. Instead, good directors should be technically proficient in their craft, have an intended meaning to their work, and do it all with a signature style. Essentially, directors should strive to be the authors of a film. That wasn't the end of the discussion, however. On the other end of the spectrum, there were challenges such as in Roland Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author. His idea was that the director was merely a scripter, aka someone who produces a work but doesn't explain it or interpret it. Sort of like the workmanlike attitude that ignited auteur theory, but as part of a cohesive framework. Further, the death of the author entailed the birth of the reader. If the director didn't ascribe meaning to a work, then the reader did. Not just a single meaning, but many interpretations. As many as there were readers, at least. Put simply, in auteur theory, the message of a work was the director's interpretation. In Barthes' theory, the message of the work was any of the multiple audience interpretations. So why am I talking about this in a video about 7 Days to Die? Well, if you've seen some streams and interviews with the Fun Pimps, you might get the idea that the Hunics are committed to seeing through their specific vision of the game. In particular, there's this statement by Richard Hunick.
We always try to listen to the community as long as what they want aligns with our design sensibilities and our business goals.
That sounds obvious for a game developer, but what does it mean for a game to align with the Fun Pimp's design sensibilities? I think he's saying that 7 Days to Die as a game should be played in the way that the Fun Pimps intends? Pretty obvious, right? But by default, the point of a game is to be fun. There can be more to it than that, but that's outside of the scope of the video. And what the Fun Pimps is saying is that you should have fun their way. In other words, their version of fun is the meaning they intend for 7 Days to Die. So does this make them the authors of 7 Days to Die? Well, yes and no. I think few games that aren't by Kojima or a solo developer are truly the product of a singular vision. And even then, I don't agree with that entirely. For a variety of reasons, but especially because of the sheer logistical challenge of game development, it tends to be a much more collaborative endeavor than filmmaking, for example. And yet, there are Kojimas, or even games that we recognize as being from a given studio. Obsidian and Bethesda overlap in genres, yet each has their own approach to making an RPG, both narratively and mechanically. Call of Duty and Battlefield are both war-themed first-person shooters, and yet there are gamers who identify themselves with their affiliation with one title, and sometimes their opposition to the other. In creating a game, all developers are making their case for what is fun, as are the Hunics. Like I said, it doesn't seem like the Fun Pimps ever promised that 7 Days to Die would be very realistic, like a survival sim. Sims being games like Arma or Flight Simulator, where the point is a gamified adherence to realism in very specific ways. 7 Days to Die may have realistic elements, eating and drinking to survive, getting sick from spoiled food, but that doesn't make it a sim. It is a sandbox, however, both by claim and mechanically. But as I said previously, that can mean a lot of different things. Maybe players got the impression of a more open sandbox from the previous bare-bones versions of the game, but it's hard to say. What is easier to say is what is fun about sandbox games. More than the average genre, in a sandbox game, your choice matters. To a great extent, you're setting the parameters for fun and then engaging with the sandbox. A good sandbox provides solid mechanics that give way to surprising and novel dynamics, primarily by making your choices meaningful. This meaning can manifest in a number of different ways and at different times. Think about how meaningful and fun it was just to survive a day in your first few hours of 7 Days to Die. Hundreds of hours later, maybe you were trying to survive day one in the snow biome, or make it through a blood moon without a base, or you were entirely removing quests and traders from the equation. These are the high-level choices that you make in sandbox games that determine the kind of fun you have. But these are systems and systems of systems, not discrete mechanics. What I mean is that there also have to be meaningful choices in the moment-to-moment loop of a game. Do you eat your charred meat to fend off hunger even at the cost of hydration? How does this decision change if you've got vitamins that let you slurp down murky water from natural sources without risking dysentery? When fighting, do you go stealth and bow, or do you sledge it up? Approaching a POI, front door, or do you make your own door? Do you spend your limited hours of daylight questing, completing challenges, building a base, or searching mailboxes for crafting magazines? Regardless, the game will reward or punish you, sometimes based on the quality of your choice, and sometimes randomly. Either way, the game is reacting to your choice, which makes it meaningful. Even the sort of random slot machine mechanics of looting play into this. Sure, you open a random trash pile and you could get a can of food that saves the day, or you could get more lead. But what if you know that purses and toilets are more likely to produce handguns and knives? What if you hit up a crack-a-books or a gun store rather than another residence? Even how you do or don't spend your skill points affects what drops you get. You're making a choice and the game responds by tipping the scales. Despite these examples, 7 Days to Die as a sandbox game seems more limited than it was in earlier states. To be clear, limitations don't necessarily result in less fun. Think of how if you're playing basketball, limiting your ability to bring a ladder makes for a more fun experience. Probably. However, it sounds like players don't want more limitations, or they're not accepting the limitations that they're getting from the fun pimps. In a quick defense of developers, I'll say that players don't always know what they want even when they think they do. If you've ever modded a game, run a D&D campaign, or even taken part in game design, you'll know that fun can be a careful balance of choice and limitations, something that players don't always entirely understand. But are the fun pimps creating fun? I mean, yes, 7 Days to Die is a fun game, but what kind of fun are they trying to create? That title's a mouthful, but remember in part 1 when I mentioned removing glass jars and tuning the zombie AI to make certain base builds unviable? Those were real examples of changes the fun pimps made to 7 Days to Die. They removed glass jars to make it harder to secure a clean water source, which was part of the Unix paradigm of designing 7 Days to Die to be a game in which nothing should be easy. In this way, the Unix are wisely telling us what fun is. Fun is relying on traders and eventually dew collectors for water to add tension to the first few hours of the game, all while we, as the player, wonder how the apocalypse brought about an end to any and all containers, except for the bucket. But we don't talk about the bucket. And it does add tension, until you solve the water problem, which takes just a few days, even on the hardest difficulty. Still, it hardly seems worth it to get worked up over jars. What about tuning their AI? Well, that's all part of the fun pimp's war on cheese. You see, certain bases in 7 Days to Die are just not fun. They're too effective at dealing with zombies. They might even exploit a programming quirk in creative ways, like this base by the YouTube creator Kosh's Pancake. Just look at it. Very obviously cheese. It's a good thing that the Fun Pimps was able to recreate it themselves in-game so that they could tune their AI to defeat it, otherwise we would be at risk of not having fun. They probably shouldn't have left that in the game files though. Okay, I'm being obnoxiously sarcastic, but my point is that time, energy, and resources went into fixing these problems. In the case of the hydration mechanic, all of this effort resulted in a system that concludes in effectively the same way. And in regards to tuning their AI to beat Kosh's Pancake's base, well, just how tuned is the AI? The Zeds haven't always been structural engineers, but these days they know exactly which blocks to break to not only get to you, but to potentially bring down your base. All of the Fun Pimp's efforts just narrowed the scope of viable designs, which is, a tower defense portion of their mission statement for 7 Days to Die. But did these limitations make for meaningful choices? I don't think so. They singled out a fringe-based design and tuned their AI to solve for it. Effectively, they reduced choice in a way that doesn't matter with glass jars, and potentially made significant changes to their code for a type of base that most players probably wouldn't even build. So why do they spend so much time and effort making sure the game is played in the specific way they envision, instead of, sorting out the bandits that they promised? More on bandits in a bit. As best as I can tell, it's a sense of pride and ownership over the game.
Oh, I don't like it when zombies dig underground. Well, we don't like exploits in our survival game, so we're going to close loopholes like that.
I spent a lot of time talking about who makes 7 Days to Die early in the video. I even made you guys listen to me talk about auteur theory. Sorry. This is where it all ties together, hopefully. The Fun Pimps, out of necessity or a desire to remain independent, or both, went with a Kickstarter campaign to launch their game, and then used Steam's early access program to maintain development. This is as opposed to finding individuals or a publisher to invest their game. I can understand this. If the average person wanted to make a game, they'd probably have to go this route. I can also understand wanting to remain independent. I mean, no one goes into making YouTube videos because they want someone to have creative control over them. Regardless, I have to ask one last time, who makes 7 Days to Die? To some extent, we as stakeholders make 7 Days to Die. We've invested in the game, not in the traditional sense, right? None of us are getting a cut of the sales. Rather, we've invested in an unfinished product because we want to play the finished game at some point. That's regardless of whether you backed it initially or just bought it on Steam. I'm sure this opinion would maybe rankle the Unix. Obviously, they're scouring YouTube to learn the opinions of tiny content creators. Please like and subscribe. Shit, maybe this opinion bothers some of you in the audience, but I think there's a fair point to be made. They get our money to make the game. We play the game as a work in progress and provide feedback, as telemetry, bug reports, or as comments in forums or videos. It's not an implied collaborative relationship. It's an actual collaborative relationship. $45 is just the price of entry, but it entitles us to be creatively invested in the design of the game. There's space between auteur theory and the death of the author, especially in a sandbox game where we, as players, have a pretty big part in creating meaning in the game. Maybe that doesn't mean we get to dictate how the game is made, but maybe it wouldn't be so bad for the game if we did have some say. When I start a new game of 7 Days to Die, I usually generate a new random world and set the difficulty to insanity. I go back and forth on feral senses, but everything else is typically default. Still, by providing all of these settings and toggles, the fun pimps are acknowledging, to some extent, that I should be able to play the game my way. Their built-in support for mods further reinforces that, even if they give the impression that their affection for mods is somewhat reserved.
I love mods, but we have a pretty strong vision, so we don't really pay attention to the mods.
But then arbitrarily they decide that I can't or shouldn't be able to build a cheese base, or I shouldn't be able to use nerd poles, which is just a strategy of using a stack of blocks to get yourself to high places, or that I should enter a POI in the way that they dictate. If the fun pimps were more open towards the idea of a collaborative relationship, I'd say that maybe they should consider the mechanics of base building, horde nights, and POIs to understand why people incorporate exploits and cheese. I mean, I use nerd poles pretty often because I don't think the game facilitates spending a large portion of an in-game day on working my way through a POI. I also don't expect or necessarily want dungeon-like POIs. I think as a challenge they're interesting, but I guess when I first got the game I envisioned that I would be methodically working my way through neighborhoods, clearing structures and collecting their resources, then moving on once there's nothing left. I think this system, though less structured, provides more meaningful choices in choosing between a list of 5 POIs and their mission types. And that wouldn't necessarily mean getting rid of dungeon-like POIs, just reserving them for special challenges. That's an example. I don't want to get into the gritty detail of every mechanic and system. I'll save that for another video. Regardless, the fun pimps seem reluctant to take input on a given design, unless it aligns with their design sensibilities or business goals. I think we've adequately covered what they mean by their design sensibilities. It's what they think is fun. We've also covered how creatively it sometimes limits fun in 7 Days to Die. I mean, Richard Hunick has said that he's seen rising sales with each alpha, so he feels that they're clearly headed in the right direction. Except that after a decade, they're not an alpha anymore. So the fun pimps might finally be out of runway. Despite past controversies and also despite a pretty successful 1.0 release, 2.0 has been particularly poorly received. Primarily, 2.0 introduced biome progression with added zombie types and variations for a good measure. It also initially capped loot stages on biomes, but they've rolled that back, which I have to give TFP credit for. To give them more credit, they've also admitted that they've shipped undercooked mechanics before. And biome progression is undercooked, but not without consideration. You can see that there was thought and intent behind it. For example, typically games force you to use up an item slot to deal with biome-based hazards. The fun pimps were smart by making it an ability, even if it doesn't suit the tone of the game. I mean, I think there's probably a better design than making it a magical badge you earn by collecting enough mushrooms, but I digress. The problem with biome progression is that given the overall state of 7 Days to Die, the fun pimps probably shouldn't spend any more time on it, or at least they shouldn't prioritize it. It's an option you can toggle on and off, but what 7 Days to Die needs to feel like it's 1.0 is not going to be found in the fun pimps implementation of biome progression. To that end, I also don't think we need different zombie types so much as we need different zombie behaviors. Weapons also need some attention, especially gun handling, and what even is farming. There's a lot more that I'll save for that other video. What I am saying is that what I find most frustrating about 2.0 is that it feels like time is spent. Like I said up top, I wrote most of this before the town hall, but I still want to address it. So initially I was writing this up as I was watching the stream, but something happened about 28 minutes in. I'll get to that shortly. And I'll give the fun pimps and the Hunicks more credit, in addition to removing the loot caps because, as they said, there's already incentive to go into new biomes. They're also making biome progression order agnostic. That means you can start your progress with any biome. You don't have to go in order. That's good. Even better, they're saying the plan has always been to have a story mode separate from the sandbox mode. Potentially, the story mode might limit choices in service of the narrative, but the sandbox will always be there. However, in what seems like a lateral move, they've turned biome badges into craftable survival kits. They don't take up an item slot, but they do disappear on death, so you'll have to keep a supply of them. I'll need to process the change before saying too much about it. They're also replacing the mushroom smoothie with a black lung serum, which is an injectable power-up that reduces storm damage, which is just kind of whatever. Right now, I probably seem like an ungrateful asshole. The fun pimps listened and changed things, but I'm worried that they stuck mainly to the superficial criticisms. They get points for dialing in the tone with changing the names of these power-ups, but remember that I did say that players don't always know what they want. It was at this point that I was planning to say that I don't want to do a play-by-play of the whole town hall, but I will add that they're also changing the way storms work, such that they give as of yet undefined biome appropriate debuffs. The storms also do less damage so that you don't have to completely stop your game and hold up for 5 minutes at a time. And Zeds are more likely to drop loot bags during a storm to encourage venturing out. I wanted to say that. I guess I did say that. But something happened that kind of derailed the whole thing.
Okay. So, can you make the new enemies fit better into the 7 Days lore? How about we go back to Joel on this one?
So yes, we've already started on that, and we're modifying the Plague Spitter to fit our kind of central Arizona lore with a Native American looking Indian. And if you guys haven't noticed, a lot of our bandits are Native American, so it's really going to tie in well with the fact that there's a lot of bandits.
The game is set in central Arizona where there's the Apache, so we're pulling it back into that lore.
There's this thing they say in filmmaking. The message of your story is like a current running through a wire. If your wire isn't the appropriate gauge for the message, you could fry the whole story, or something like that. I don't necessarily need social commentary in my sandbox, RPG, tower defense, zombie game. There is a history of that in horror and specifically zombie media, but I don't need or expect that from 7 Days to Die. I just wouldn't make a game in which the majority of bad guys you kill are all part of one ethnic group, especially if there's, say, a history of tropes about cowboys versus Indians, or if, certain colonial powers committed a genocide against that ethnic group. It's not that there wouldn't necessarily be a story to tell, it's just that, well, for some reason, I don't trust the fun pimps to tell this story with nuance.
Give us your dirtiest and sexiest Trader Jen quote. Okay, it's going to be an older one. Drop your weapons or drop your drawers.
I mean, so far, there is no story. I can be charitable and say that they didn't do this in bad faith.
With a Native American looking Indian.
It's just hard to feel particularly inclined to be charitable right now. But let's move past the unnecessary politics and put a bow on this whole thing. Here are the takeaways. 7 Days to Die has been in development by the Fun Pimps for over a decade. During that time, there have been controversial changes to the game's systems and mechanics. The Fun Pimps has at times been adversarial in their relationship with players. Their first ever town hall showed a willingness to have a more collaborative relationship with players. That said, I still think they should leave biome progression alone and focus on other more critical aspects of the game. They're probably not going to do that though. This was my first attempt at this kind of video. It might definitely have room for growth. And also the ending of this video got a little scrambled by the town hall. It is what it is. I hope you learned a little bit about the Fun Pimps' long development history with 7 Days to Die. I also hope that with the Town Hall, the Fun Pimps are committing to a more collaborative relationship with the 7 Days to Die community, even though I don't advocate that they just do exactly what the players are saying, although it's kind of looking that way. I just think they can be more thoughtful of their mechanics in the context of types of fun that exist outside of their design sensibilities. I get that 7 Days to Die is the Unix vision, but there's a lot to be gained by engaging in the dialogue between the reader and the author. And that's the video. If you found it entertaining, hit the like button. If you want more, hit subscribe and hit the bell, and I will see you guys next time.